It's a medieval siege, something you'd expect in the Middle Ages. These were the words of UNICEF's Sheldon Yett, as reported in The Guardian, but while drawing comparisons with centuries past, they didn't. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is at war. Right now, a rebel insurgency has taken hold in the country's east, capturing villages, pushing back Congolese soldiers, and proving all but impossible to shake out from their centers of power. The Congo is fighting hard to contain them, but it's struggling to do so as the rebels perpetrate unbelievable atrocities against civilians and soldiers alike. Even with the help of foreign guidance, the Congo is unable to get the upper hand, and as the rebels take more and more territory, the nation's incredibly lucrative natural resources fall under insurgent control. But if that sounds like we're describing the Congo War that you might already know, fought between the governments in Kinshasa and the Rwanda-backed rebel group M23, well, think again, because the other war, hidden in the Congolese east, promises to be even worse. The rebels are known as the ADF, a ruthless, extremist movement that swears loyalty to the Islamic State and trains thousands of disillusioned young men to plunder and pillage as they see fit. Neighboring Uganda already has boots on the ground, but it's not enough, and as the ADF swells in power, it risks setting off a final cascade that could destroy the Congo as we know it. Just before we continue with today's episode, let me be honest, bad underwear kind of just ruins your day in a quiet and persistent way, doesn't it? You're like, why? I can't wait to go home and put some different trousers on. I'll just change my pants, please. Well, this is where today's fantastic sponsor, Sheath, comes into the picture. They make the most incredible boxer briefs that you will ever wear. They are the only underwear that I wear anymore because all of my old underwear has been thrown out and gradually replaced with Sheath. Now, they have this very specific system, which honestly I was a bit skeptical of at first. It's got different parts for your different parts, if you get what I mean, like for dudes. You know, it keeps everything separated. It keeps everything comfortable and not sweaty and just not unpleasant. And I mean, that's true in the summer. It's true all year round, let's be honest, gents. And this is just the way to go. The fabric is breathable, it is stretchy, it is moisture wicking. It basically just made to survive everything from like a heat wave to just, you know, being in the office where it's a bit too warm, especially down there. Plus, they've started using bamboo and mesh in newer styles, which somehow makes them even better. I've got a bunch of those as well. They're easy to wash, easy to like, and, well, yeah, I just swapped all my other underwear, so you should try them as well because they're fantastic. Go to sheath.com/warfronts and use the code warfronts to get 20% off your order. That's sheath.com/warfronts, code warfronts. And now back to today's episode. Let's have a pop quiz because everybody loves those. What is the official name for the North Korean government? Ooh, great question, Evan, who wrote this script. The country's the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. It's going to be something like the Godly Kims or something, right? It's not the Kim family dynasty regime or the royal dictatorship of Pyongyang. It's the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Oh, okay, it is that. Excellent. Of course, if you know anything about the North Korean state in real life, you'll know that it is neither democratic nor a republic, nor even slightly concerned with its own people. But then you'd also know the cardinal rule of naming things. In world politics, names, whether for movements or for nations, don't determine destiny. So perhaps it should be unsurprising that the Islamic State affiliate that's currently running roughshod across the eastern Congo plays by North Korea's rules of nomenclature. The ADF, officially speaking, are the Allied Democratic Forces. Unlike the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, the ADF has spent exactly none of its time as an allied democratic force. The ADF got its start in the 1990s as the brainchild of a Ugandan convert to Islam named Jamil Makulu. Based in Uganda at the time that he started organizing an armed insurgent group, Makulu had spent time in Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, learning Salafi jihadist ideology, picking up some military training, and hanging out with Osama bin Laden. For real. When Makulu came home to Uganda, he tried to take an active role in some important elections, but ended up leading about 1,000 people in riots that left 4 police officers dead. These were made up of Makulu and about 430 of the people who'd followed him, members of an Islamic sect called Tablighi. Makulu spent a couple of years in prison, during which time he and his associates decided to form a resistance, and eventually a local Islamic caliphate. They organized into an insurgency, endured a few brutal raids from the Ugandan government, and fled across the porous border into the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the DRC. And again, for the record, that is a place which is neither democratic or a functioning republic. In 1995, Makuli joined his resistance together with a number of other Ugandan rebel factions hiding out in the Congo, and thus the Allied Democratic Forces was born. Now, as for what the ADF actually believed, well, if you want specifics, you have to ask them. In broad strokes, they see themselves as members of a religious uprising, trying to fight back against discrimination against their specific brand of Islam within Uganda and establish a better nation to host their movement. A part of the ADF movement, although not all of it, wants to build a caliphate, and in this particular case, ideology really doesn't go much deeper than that. At least not before the discussion descends into infighting that we, as outsiders, don't really need to focus on. The ADF is an organized religious insurgency. It has a massive bone to pick with Uganda, and for decades it's maintained a presence in Uganda's remote western mountains while using the near anarchy of the eastern DRC as a base of operations. They've intermittently launched large attacks in both nations. They've spread small cells all across the DRC and Uganda, and starting in 2017, they fell in with the global Islamic State movement. Within a couple of years, the ADF shed a small splinter group of loyalists to the original cause and basically became a full appendage of the Islamic State. They survived a subsequent offensive from the DRC, they've spread out in opposite directions, and the bulk of the ADF settled in the Congolese region, where they've since rebuilt their forces, the Ituri province. Alright, so fast forward to today, and the Congo is a very different place than what it was when the first bands of ADF fighters came streaming across the border from Uganda. Led by an iron-fisted autocrat named Felix Tshisekedi, the Congo is in the middle of a war that's only escalated since 2024. In that war, a larger and more powerful rebel faction, M23, has managed to beat back the Congolese government and establish control across a large part of the country. M23 is supported financially, logistically, and militarily by the neighboring nation of Rwanda, and with the help of several thousand uniformed Rwandan soldiers fighting on the Congo soil, M23 has taken over 2 provisional capital cities in the past year. These are the cities of Goma and Bukavu, located on the northern and southern ends, respectively, of a large body of water called Lake Kivu. Just as important, M23 has captured the entire Congolese border with Rwanda, enabling Rwanda to smuggle large amounts of a highly lucrative metal, coltan, out. Together, Rwanda and M23 have engaged in a cycle of territorial capture and self-enrichment, and together they've proved that the DRC government can't really do very much to stop them. The Congolese military is under-equipped, underfunded, and undermotivated. It battles well over 100 insurgencies in the Congo's east, besides M23 and the ATF, and the nation's political leadership is incredibly corrupt, interested mostly just in self-dealing and state graft. Technically, the Congo and Rwanda are bound by a peace agreement signed in the summer of 2025, while the Congo and M23 are engaged in their own separate peace process. In reality, though, the situation has barely improved, with intense violence ongoing in and around areas that M23 controls, with Rwanda seeming to benefit tremendously from the control that M23 provides. Millions are displaced, tens of millions across the DRC grapple with chronic food insecurity, and the death toll from the recent fighting is practically impossible to pin down. It's here, in the chaos and the anarchy of the eastern Congo, that a group like the Allied Democratic Forces can thrive. But instead of just minding their own affairs and living as they please in Ituri province, the ADF has recently kicked off a wave of incredibly violent attacks in Ituri and the surrounding region. Neither civilians, nor local militias, nor even government troops are immune from attack, and by all outward indicators, the ADF isn't just carrying out massacres for massacre's sake. Someone within the shadowy inner circle of the ADF's leadership has decided that now is the time to build a caliphate. And just before we get into that, let me tell you about our fantastic newsletter. It goes out twice per week, once long form, once a bit of a Friday blitz, which is actually what we called it. The newsletter is completely free. It keeps you right up to date with everything that we don't quite get to here or that we need to get to extra quickly. You can sign up through the link below. Like I said, did I say it's free? Why would you not? Why would you not? Let's get back to it. If anything is known for sure about the ADF, it's the group's undeniable taste for blood. Ever since it was founded, across Uganda and the DRC, the ADF has carried out mass attacks against the civilian population, sometimes using firearms, sometimes by bombings, sometimes by taking dozens of people captive at once, but usually by machete. Some of the attacks that the ADF has carried out over the broad span of the insurgency are among the most horrific acts of organized terror that the modern world has seen. In 1998, they massacred 80 students at a technical school. In 1999, they broke well over 300 terrorists out of prison. In December 2013, they launched attacks on a Congolese city that saw 21 people beheaded and dozens more massacred. In 2014, they dressed up as Congolese soldiers and massacred up to 80 civilians just days before hacking 36 to death with machetes in the same area. In 2017, they killed 15 UN peacekeepers and 5 Congolese soldiers, while in 2020, 40 civilians would be hacked to death in the span of a single village assault. In 2023, according to the conflict tracking group ACLED, the ADF was responsible for over 1,000 civilian deaths. But once the M23 rebellion around Lake Kivu started to heat up in early 2025, the ADF capitalized on the chaos with a new level of efficiency. In January, days after locals uncovered the bodies of numerous combat veterans who the ADF appeared to have hunted down and killed, the insurgents began a new asymmetric campaign in the countryside. By January the 15th, the massacres had started again, with 32 civilians left dead on that day, killed by machete in the village of Mahangi. Another coordinated attack at the end of the month killed another 15 people, while dozens more were killed or wounded in smaller attacks across the region. In early February, the ADF killed over 100 people across several massacres in Ituri, and then abducted and beheaded at least 70 Christian civilians in North Kivu province. Uganda surged troops into the province and threatened to take a city by force if necessary, but the ADF didn't slow down. Over the following months, as M23 swelled in strength and took over Goma and then Bukavu, the ADF was busy raiding villages, burning homes and attacking civilians with few, if any, consequences. Those massacres still persist to this day. At least 43 civilians killed at night vigil in mid-July, at least 52 killed in a North Kivu attack in mid-August, and countless smaller asymmetric attacks dotting the landscape. Making matters worse, the ADF was supposed to be on the back foot before the new wave of violence began. Since 2021, the Congo has partnered with Ugandan forces in Operation Shuija, a joint military counter-offensive that's meant to stamp out the ADF and other smaller insurgencies in the Ituri and Kivu regions. Although the fighting hasn't been easy, the joint forces claim to have killed hundreds of ADF fighters over the course of the operation, with Uganda claiming that in late 2023, the number of ADF and Islamic State fighters killed had crested past 500. The joint force had taken credit for pushing the ADF out of long-protected strongholds, securing cities that had been the target of ADF violence for years, and killing highly ranked members of the group that had pillaged their way across the border region with impunity. But in a way, it's the achievements of Operation Shuja that have destabilized the region even further. Instead of fighting hard to keep their bases and their prior center of power, the ADF committed to fully asymmetric warfare, melting away into the dense jungle, splintering off into roving bands, and appearing to switch over to digital communications to coordinate further attacks. Those smaller bands of fighters now spread over a much wider geographical area, moving unpredictably toward new communities that hadn't been at anywhere near as much risk before the offensive. Because they have to move around so often and can't settle long enough to either establish supply lines or produce their own food, these bands are even more incentivized to prey on local communities for subsistence, and in turn, violent confrontation becomes ever more likely. When Uganda surged thousands of troops into the Congo to deal with the ADF's 2025 escalation, it succeeded in displacing these bands yet again. But for the insurgents, that doesn't seem to matter much anymore. With the chaos coming from North and South Kivu, the ADF has proved adept in taking advantage of M23-related violence to perpetrate attacks of its own. On numerous occasions, the ADF has seemed to track and then shadow M23 violence with its own, attacking civilians in areas that M23 had only just hit, or taking advantage of M23 victories and the corresponding troop movements to the DRC to attack newly exposed weak points in the areas they control. All the while, they've shifted away from the territory of the nation that actually can focus on them, Uganda, while moving their operational center toward the war zone in North Kivu. According to Ugandan military intelligence, the ADF has even agreed to new alliances with other insurgent groups, including a militant network called CODECO, itself implicated in massacres in 2025. To ally itself with any other movement in the 2020s is a rare step for the ADF to take, but it reflects the opportunity that the ADF perceives in a moment when territory in the eastern Congo is just ripe for the taking. Now, at the time of writing, a fragile early ceasefire in the eastern Congo appears as if it's about to come apart in a collapse that would send the DRC and M23 back toward each other's throats. Meanwhile, ADF violence only continues, with the group seeming even more emboldened now that it can operate in the grey space of the frozen conflict zone. Congolese forces can't focus on it, Ugandan forces can't catch it, and M23, at least outwardly, doesn't seem to mind its presence. The two insurgencies operate in close proximity, but avoid crossing paths whenever possible. Assuming that the war in the Congo either restarts relatively soon or remains in a mostly frozen stalemate between M23 and Rwanda, the ADF is primed to take advantage. Their actual fighting strength, that's difficult to pin down. A few years ago, they were thought to have only a few hundred fighters, and that still could be the case today. The ADF, partly because of their own actions, are based in one of the most dangerous regions on Earth, where it's exceptionally difficult for outside reporters or researchers to gain safe access, and where groups like the ADF are entirely comfortable melting away into forests without ever gathering in the open. But although that means they could be a tiny force, by any global standard, it also means that their numbers could be swelling over time, recruiting and training new fighters under some of the thickest fog of war anywhere in the world. Local recruits do seem to be joining the ADF at alarming rates, and they're not the only ones. The anarchy of the Eastern Congo and the lack of scrutiny from the outside world has made it a favoured link in the global Islamic State network, which sends experienced foreign fighters in large numbers to swell the ADF's ranks. Not only that, but the ADF has become a key conduit for Islamic State financial operations. As the leadership of the global Islamic State comes under threat in the northern Somali region of Puntland, where they've been based for the last couple of years, it's likely that a growing number of those international leaders will make their pilgrimage and find refuge in Ituri. At the same time, the ADF is deeply integrated into local financial networks and black markets, self-funding their operations with relatively impressive results. Long before this most recent wave of violence, the ADF had made itself a key part of the local economy, smuggling gold, lucrative timber, and critical minerals from the DRC into Uganda, where the resources they've captured can be sold at a premium to black market middlemen. Now the middlemen have changed. With the ADF abandoning the Ugandan border, it'll more frequently deal with M23, Rwanda, and other militias that will buy resources and then try to resell at a profit. But the same basic formula remains. The ADF will capture, extract, loot, or otherwise obtain whatever lucrative assets they can, make some money, and then use that money to finance recruitment, logistics, and further attacks. As for whether the ADF can really seize on this moment and establish the caliphate that the Islamic State organization so covets, that path is complicated. Right now, the ADF isn't in a position to claim a large pocket of territory and thus to open itself up for a sustained military offensive by Uganda. Right now, the ADF travels in units known as camps with armed insurgents, their families, and captured civilians moving about the landscape, pitching tents wherever they land, and taking their weapons and supplies with them. The camps are substantial. All told, between fighters, civilians, and hostages, ACLED estimated in early 2025 that the largest camp is made up of 1,000 or more people. But if they grow any larger, they stop being mobile. And if they stop being mobile, they're vulnerable to Ugandan reprisals at scale, perhaps for that reason.
51% of the total damage with necromancy during cape for whatever style you clear the most. Are some non-conventional methods that we're going to go over that allow you to get it as low as level 40 necromancy, although realistically I'd probably wait until about level 60 so it's an easier time. While I go over the method, consider subbing for future necro content. The kiln awards a cape for whatever style you clear the most waves with. There are 37 waves total, meaning you only bring ranged, melee, and magic along with necromancy, then you only need to do 10 waves with necromancy and then 9 with the other styles. It gets even better. For a wave to count as cleared with necro, you only need to deal 51% of the total damage with necromancy during the wave. It gets even better. If you bring ranged, melee, and magic along with necromancy, then you only need to do 10 waves with necromancy and then 9 with the other styles. It gets even better. For only need to clear 19 of them with necromancy. There are 37 waves total, meaning you only need to clear 19 of them with necromancy and the rest with another style. but that number drops even lower if you bring additional styles. If you bring ranged, melee, and magic along with necromancy, then you only need to do 10 waves with necromancy and then 9 with the other styles. It gets even better. For a wave to count as cleared with necro, you only need to deal 51% of the total damage with necromancy during the wave. So for example, let's consider wave 1. There are a total of 5 monsters, so let's say you kill 3 of them with necromancy, you can kill the other 2 with melee instead, and it'll still count as a necromancy wave. So
the ADF hasn't really tried to take control of local governments over the last couple of years. Instead, they attack, loot everything they can find, kidnap locals for ransom, kill whoever they like, and move on to repeat the process someplace else. But the ADF is an insurgency that's become accustomed to playing the long game, and barring a surprise long-term peace agreement between the Congo and M23, the ADF has a major opportunity to play the Congo to its own benefit. Uganda, despite the rhetoric of its military leaders, can't simply chase down the ADF in the Congo as they see fit. Nor can they follow the ADF too close to M23 territory, lest they get wrapped up in a proxy war with Rwanda. The Congo can't muster the forces it would need to hunt down the ADF. At best, they can deter the ADF from attacking certain areas and try to counterattack when the ADF launches an assault. Put plainly, the ADF is safe as long as it stays mobile and keeps doing what it's doing. But add the context of the M23 conflict, and an ADF attempt to hold steady turns into an opportunity for conquest. It was only a couple of months ago that the Congo was trying desperately to shore up its forces, worried that M23 was about to make a run on the capital city, barreling down a major highway like Syria's rebels did in late 2024 toward Damascus, or like Wagner Group mercenaries did in 2023 toward Moscow. It could still take as little as a couple of months, as few as 1 or 2 destabilizing incidents at the right time and place to send the DRC back to that precipice again. In that situation, it wouldn't take much from the ADF to send Congolese forces into a tailspin, an asymmetric raiding campaign against their backlines, the seizure of a nearby town or city as a distraction, or a wave of suicide bombings against military targets, just to name a few options. Cause chaos, force Congolese troops into disarray, and the ADF could clear the way for M23 and its Rwandan allies to deliver maximum damage. The ADF can't bring down the Congolese government in Kinshasa, at least not by itself. But what the insurgent group can do is create conditions in which the incredibly fragile Congolese state would be at risk of complete collapse. Strike a backroom deal with M23, gain the consent of Rwanda, or create a situation where Uganda has to pull back, and the ADF could find itself in a vastly improved position. Quickly. Instead of being beaten with the hammer of Ugandan forces backed up against the unsteady but decent enough anvil that is the Congolese military, the ADF could find itself in de facto control of a decent chunk of lands with few, if any, adversary forces to be found. At the same time, it would find lucrative mines and lumber forests to exploit, with local communities trapped and living at the ADF's mercy. Best of all, from the ADF's perspective, it would stand a good chance at being listened to when it approaches its higher-ups in the global Islamic State movement and says, "We've got the chance to build a caliphate, surge money, fighters and resources now." With a lot of luck, there's still hope that the deteriorating situation in the Congo can be stabilized and that the DRC, Uganda, Rwanda, and their international partners can start building toward a better situation. In that world, perhaps the ADF finds itself on the receiving end of a coordinated counter-insurgent campaign with the power to put a permanent end to the group's reign of terror. But if there's any constant in the eastern Congo, it's the instability, the chaos, and the anarchy that's allowed the ADF insurgency to thrive. If the Congo can't stop the ADF from lying in wait, then it shouldn't be surprised if, when all begins to collapse, it's the Allied Democratic Forces that deal Kinshasa its killing blow. Thank you for watching. Officially, the Democratic Republic of the Congo is at peace. Brilliant! But unofficially, the peace is barely an illusion at all. Right now, battles still rage in the jungles of the Congolese East as government forces, powerful militias, a massive insurgent army and the next-door nation of Rwanda pour bodies, blood and bullets into the conflict zone. Forces amassing for an upcoming push, terrorist factions are exploiting the chaos, and ceasefire talks are practically non-existent. On paper, the Congo War is supposed to be over. Everybody should be getting rich, and Donald Trump should be getting that Nobel Peace Prize that he so desperately wants.
Thank you very much. This I didn't know.
But on the ground, a peace that never really existed in the first place is about to give way completely. The Congo is entering a phase of fighting that could be even more ruinous than the last. Now, before we explain the situation in the Congo right now, we've got to get to the lay of the land. Who's fighting, why they're fighting, and why does most of the world believe that Congo is at peace? To answer the first question, we've got the short answer and then the long answer, but the short answer goes something like this. In the eastern regions of the Congo, and particularly in two provinces known as North Kivu and South Kivu, Congolese government forces are fighting a rebel insurgency called M23, while M23 in turn is a proxy force that's supported by neighboring Rwanda. But it's in the long answer that we can see where the idea of a peace begins to fall apart. The Democratic Republic of the Congo does have a proper military. It's under-equipped, it's underfunded, it's under-motivated and under-trained, but it exists, and they have been fighting in this part of the Congo for many years, not just against M23, but against some 120 small insurgencies or more spread out across the Congolese East. They also don't fight alone. They're accompanied by a range of government-allied militias, some of them more powerful than others, and some of them more willing to actually listen to the government's directions instead of simply doing as they please. On the positive end, from the government's perspective, They're often far more motivated to fight than government troops, since they're often locally based militias fighting to defend their families and their community. On the less positive side, many of them are prone to committing all manner of wartime atrocities. That, by the way, is going to become a bit of a recurring theme in today's episode, but for now, suffice it to say that all sides of this conflict have an appetite for war crimes. On the other side of the conflict, M23 has been active in the Congo for over a decade, but after being defeated in battle in 2012 and going dormant, they've really become a problem again starting in 2022. From that time, they've grown stronger and stronger until they captured the two provincial capitals in the regions they're going to take over: Goma in North Kivu and Bukavu in South Kivu, as well as a number of other major townships. Just before we get into the video today, it's brought to you by Outskill. Who are Outskill? Well, they are the largest AI education company on the planet, which is, AI is becoming very important. Recently, Microsoft said that they could eliminate 36% of their workforce through AI automation, which is kind of scary because you think if you work at Microsoft, you've got to be really skilled. Amazon, JP Morgan, Ford are all cutting jobs, but why not change things? Instead of being replaced by AI, why not be someone who's leading the charge? And that's why I have partnered with Outskill to give you guys free access to their 2-day AI Mastermind this weekend. Normally costs $895, but for you guys, my viewers, 1,000 free seats for the next 72 hours. 4 million people globally have already attended, and they're now using AI to earn more money, get those promotions, all of that good stuff. You'll master prompt engineering, learn 10 powerful AI tools like Make.com and Claude, build AI agents, automate your work, and create apps with AI, or even running your own business. This is for you, so mark your calendars. It's this Saturday and Sunday, 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. both days. Sign up now. You'll get $5,000 worth of bonuses, including a 3,000 plus prompt Bible. There is a link in the description below, as well as in the pinned comment. Grab your free seat before it expires and join their WhatsApp community for updates. Don't get left behind by AI. Master it this very weekend. And now today's episode. M23 also doesn't fight alone. Instead, it leads a loose rebel confederacy known as the Congo River Alliance. Together, M23 and their allies have secured the DRC's entire border with neighboring Rwanda, a large stretch of the border with Uganda, and a relatively small but ever-growing portion of the territory of North and South Kivu. They also fight with the backing of Rwanda, something that Rwandan President Paul Kagame and his government have always denied. Despite Kagame's claims to the contrary, M23 has benefited from the direct frontline support of several thousand Rwandan troops at any given time, as well as logistical, financial, tactical, strategic, and diplomatic support. Rwanda has expended ample blood and lives in this conflict, with satellite imagery of the nation's Kanobe military cemetery showing a massive expansion of grave sites within the last year, at a time when Rwanda's forces aren't engaged in any other conflict of this magnitude. For all practical purposes, M23 today is a Rwandan proxy force, although like any other non-state actor serving a more powerful backer, its goals and the goals of Rwanda don't always line up. As for what's driving the conflict, there are a few key forces to account for. Ethnic tensions do play a major role. Both M23 and Rwanda are led by ethnic Tutsis, the same group that was on the receiving end of the Rwandan genocide. They frame their actions, in part, as an effort to protect Tutsi civilians and deal with aggression from ethnic Hutu militants, the same ethnic group that perpetrated the Rwandan genocide. In practice, that ethnic dimension does a poor job explaining the current conflict by itself, but it is an important angle to consider. The same can't be said for M23's stated ambition to challenge and potentially overthrow the Congolese government in the capital of Kinshasa. This is certainly something that M23 still seems to want, and many of its fighters actively seek to bring about the fall of the Kinshasa government, a notoriously corrupt collection of leaders with a whole mess of skeletons in their closets. Again, this is a conflict with a lot of bad actors doing a lot of bad things. Kinshasa is no more immune from that than M23 is, but really, the crux of the conflict, and certainly the bulk of Rwanda's motivation, is that this is a resource war. Like the rest of the Congo, North and South Kivu are positively awash in valuable minerals, and in this particular part of the country, there's a whole lot to gain by taking control. North and South Kivu are home to massive reserves of coltan, a resource in high demand across the developed world to fuel the global transition to renewables. It's also got lots of gold and diamonds, the value of which needs no explanation, along with tin, a compound called wolframite, a limited amount of oil and gas, and some lucrative timbers and agricultural zones. Similar to, say, the way Russia has used the mercenary Wagner Group to oversee the harvest of lucrative minerals across Africa, Rwanda uses M23, but in Rwanda's case, it's an even better deal. Now that M23 has secured the entire Rwandan border, it can smuggle materials into Rwanda at will, with Rwanda processing those goods or selling them raw as if they came from Rwanda all along. In return, M23 gets land, military backing, and a share of the profits. And then there's this question of a fragile peace that wasn't, where, if we're being brutally honest, the United States, the Congo, and Rwanda recently pulled off one hell of a diplomatic smoke and mirrors display. You see, back in June, the Congo and Rwanda signed a peace deal, mediated by the United States, that came with a few key terms. Rwanda would withdraw troops from the Congo, while the Congo dismantled a Hutu militia. Both sides would stop supporting non-state actors. Each of them would sign lucrative mineral supply deals with the United States, with the US putting itself in a position to guzzle up resources from both nations. But that deal, to put it mildly, was incomplete. And in fact, it came with so many problems that it was hardly a truce at all. First and foremost, the deal didn't include M23, a force that is a Rwandan proxy, but like we explained, it comes with its own distinct motivations and ample ability to act contrary to Rwanda's wishes. Nor did the deal include any other members of M23's rebel alliance or any of the non-state actors that fight alongside the Congo. And although the deal got Rwanda to agree to a peace, it didn't get Rwanda to admit that it had ever been at war. Ever since the start of this conflict, Rwanda has denied having anything to do with M23's capture of land, its war against Kinshasa, or its conduct on the battlefield, despite very obviously sending thousands of uniformed soldiers to go and help. As a result, Rwanda has never acknowledged its participation in the war, something it still hasn't done and wasn't asked to do under the auspices of the peace deal. Therefore, Rwanda doesn't have to act as if it's even slightly constrained by the document, and, as we'll explain, Rwanda has given only the briefest period of token compliance before making ready for a return to battle. So why was the peace deal signed? Well, that's because Washington and its allies understand that it's bad form to go and sign deals to develop an active war zone. The response to that whole Gaza Riviera thing seems to have helped get that message across. Instead, Rwanda and the DRC both understand that they could attract massive Western investment by signing a deal, and so they did, with the Trump administration in Washington taking credit and to allied governments deciding, rather conspicuously, that they wouldn't raise any real concerns. As Responsible Statecraft put it in an article, US investors were allowed to swarm into the Congo before the ink on the peace deal was even dry. And if you need a bit more reason to be skeptical, then try this out for size. The Congo and M23 were engaged in a parallel effort mediated by Qatar to find a peace deal of their own, even signed a so-called Declaration of Principles, basically a document in which they agreed rhetorically that they were interested in eventually coming to a real peace. Once it became clear that Western investment offers were underway, that real setting was fell apart, first when a scheduled series of negotiations didn't happen, and now with both sides technically present at the negotiating table, the talks are being stalled. As of right now, there is no indication the progress will resume, and okay, so peace deal that isn't a peace deal, governing a proxy war that supposedly isn't a proxy war between two sides that function more as if they're 20 sides. It's probably no surprise at all that things have started to break down again. As for how it came to be, the Western Congo restarted, and unfortunately, it never really stopped. Even while peace talks were ongoing, it was really only the Congolese military proper that stopped fighting M23 directly. Powerful pro-government militias in North and South Kivu, particularly a coalition known as the Wazalendo, continued to engage M23 regularly with skirmishes, short offensives, and pushes in their direction to dispute control of villages, highways, resource mines. During that same period, before direct peace talks between the Congo and M23 even broke down, Congolese forces were still coming into intermittent contact across the front line. In mid-August, for example, Congolese forces directly repelled an M23 advance, while Wazalendo and their militia fighters battled M23 on several other fronts simultaneously. And to be clear here, global observers and Congolese strategists have no illusions about the fighting was probably right on the ground. For years, M23 Congolese forces, the Wazalendos and all other groups party to this conflict, have been accused of all sorts of horrific war crimes and atrocities. But at a time when a fair portion of the world needed reminding about what this war entails, the United Nations was there to oblige, capturing headlines in September with a report detailing, quote, gross human rights violations on all sides of the conflict since late 2024. According to the UN's report, M23 is engaged in regular summary executions, forced disappearances, forced recruitment, and torture in the areas it controls, while also recruiting child soldiers. The Congolese armed forces were accused of deliberately slaughtering civilians after infighting between themselves and the Wazalendo, while the Wazalendo themselves were accused of looting and the recruitment of child soldiers for frontline combat. Rwanda was also implicated, with the report maintaining that Rwanda bears direct responsibility for other atrocities committed by members of its armed forces while they fight on Congolese territory. All sides were accused of the mass, routine use of sexual violence as a weapon of war. In the last couple of weeks, after it became clear that the Congo M23 talks in Qatar would stall for the long run, the Congolese government has been accused of preparing a new military assault. According to M23's rebel alliance, Congolese forces launched a major two-pronged offensive on September the 8th, starting out with forces positioned in the city of Uvira and in the city of Bujumbura, on the territory of the neighboring nation of Burundi. According to M23, that government offensive was targeting civilian areas using artillery and drones. A few days prior to that, Congolese forces had engaged in a failed offensive to try and capture the town of Shah, where they and their allied militias were briefly able to gain control, but were pushed out by an M23 counteroffensive. During those same few days, a force of at least 750 Rwandan soldiers was reported as having arrived on the inland island of Ijwi in the southern part of Lake Kivu, where they're likely massing to travel toward that same battle zone. And as if to confirm that the Congolese government was no longer interested in discussions of peace, the nation's president, Felix Tshisekedi, turned down an invitation to a new series of regional peace talks with M23, set to be held in South Africa. Although there were semi-legitimate reasons for Tshisekedi not to attend, for fear that the conference hosts may be preferential to M23 and other parts of the Congo's opposition, it was still a chance to re-engage M23 outside of the talks in Qatar, and that opportunity was gone. All the while, other armed groups in the Congo take advantage of the chaos and confusion in order to violently advance their own goals. In North Kivu province, as well as the northern province of Ituri, a fearsome group, known rather euphemistically as the Allied Democratic Forces, has carried out a sequence of mass murders against civilian populations. The ADF is a direct affiliate of the Islamic State movement, known for regular attacks on villages that use machetes and other bladed weapons to deal out unimaginable, brutal violence. Most recently, as of the time of writing, the ADF slaughtered at least 71 people who were attending a funeral in the district of Natoyo in North Kivu province. That was the third ADF attack to kill over 40 civilians at a time within just the last 6 weeks. And it came on the same day that a separate group of ADF fighters killed another 18 people. In recent days, unarmed protesters in have also come under threat. In the city of Uvira in South Kivu province this week, still under the DRC government, at least 4 protesters were shot dead by the military while demonstrating against a military officer who's accused of supporting M23. Uvira, by the way, is the same area that we just mentioned as a staging ground for what appears to be a build-up in advance of a new government push into M23 territory. All across the eastern Congo, warning lights are flashing bright red to signal an immediate return to conflict. And unlike the warning signs we see in other situations, the nations that a region like this is about to evolve, this rapid devolution is being signaled through an active return to fighting on several fronts. This is not an abstraction. It is a transparently obvious series of changes that should make it impossible that this region is still governed by a ceasefire. As of now, this return to fighting in the Congo has been met with silence. The White House, which so proudly presided over a signing ceremony and handshake between Tshisekedi and Kagame, has yet to acknowledge what's happening. When asked about it directly in late August, Trump responded of his purported peace deal, for 35 years, it was a vicious war. 9 million people were killed with machetes. I stopped it. I got it stopped and saved lots of lives. End quote. If the White House intends to revise that statement, it hasn't happened yet, and in fact it's important to emphasize that there's at least one course of action that's in the Congo's, Rwanda's, and America's common interest: to keep up the illusion of peace. Through the signing of its deal with the Congo, Rwanda has bought itself all the diplomatic cover it needs to maintain its capture and further exploitation of a chunk of territory almost half as large as Rwanda itself. The Congo has been able to facilitate exceptionally lucrative resource extraction deals with expected returns that could completely offset the mineral losses it sustained in Rwanda. Rwanda thus far. The United States has helped to please wealthy business leaders secure important supply chains and push Trump closer to the Nobel Prize that he seems absolutely hell-bent on getting, despite the facts on the ground. Stick to the story about peace, all sides materially benefit. But if that's the case, then we have to ask an equal and opposite question. If the veneer of peace is so profitable, then why return to fighting at all? Well, unfortunately, that's a question with several answers at once. For one thing, both the Congo and Rwanda's goals appear to be maximization of profit. Both sides want to continue to capture mines, forests, and other lucrative assets, with their militia and proxy allies motivated to increase the size of their piece of the pie. For another, there's a reason that we've emphasized that although M23 is a Rwandan proxy, it has its own goals and objectives. M23 does not desire an expansion of its territory, a continuation of fighting against hated armed groups, and an eventual overthrow of the government in Kinshasa. Rwanda might not believe that those goals are worthy or important, but Rwanda can't just tell M23 to abandon its higher goals. After all, it's M23 that's securing the Congo's territory on Rwanda's behalf, and it's only because of M23 that Rwanda can benefit without causing a bigger international incident. M23 controls the mines and the smuggling routes, and thus M23 controls the money in a way Rwanda would be foolish to ignore. There's also the fact that the Congolese government, despite its general lack of interest in the well-being of its people, still has to do something to group occupy its territory in order to maintain legitimacy. And finally, there's the fact that Wazalendo and the Congo's other government-aligned militias have been acting against M23 and are no easier for the Congo to control than M23 is for Rwanda to control. This conflict creates a mess of overlapping incentives for each of its participants, but all of them are incentivized to pursue one common goal: maintain the illusion of peace while returning to war. In practice, that goal is not easy to pursue, but it would be easier if the Congo, Rwanda, M23, Wazalendo, and the US government all work toward peace. And for the people living in the middle of this conflict, it's the worst possible outcome, caught between a mess of warring factions, all having to accomplish atrocities of scale, but none to object to the rest of the world, innocent civilians could possibly suffer. Even groups like the Islamic State-affiliated ADF benefit from that arrangement, with the powers that be in this region incentivized to keep the world's attention elsewhere, no matter what sort of horrors the ADF will perpetrate. Even as the people in the middle are going to suffer, forced to endure their situation in silence, and quite likely having that silence enforced by all sides. As for where the conflict goes from here, we'll start with the situation on the battlefield. Right now, force concentration on both sides will suggest that the next phase of violence will be concentrated in South Kivu province, with the ultimate objective of retaking the regional capital. Unlike the city of Goma to the north, Bukavu is only minimally insulated by surrounding M23-controlled territory, and it's near to a buffer zone maintained by Burundi, meant to ensure that M23 can't pose a threat as it attempted to do a few months ago. Moving inward from Uvira and Bujumbura, Congolese and allied forces can zero in on a rural district called Kamanyola, a strategically critical juncture that could be turned into a launchpad for a recapture of the city. Wazalendo fighters are keeping up the pressure in other areas across South Kivu, keeping M23 forces occupied and forcing them to divide their attention. Those 750 incoming troops from Rwanda appear to be headed for the zone, and in all likelihood, they won't be the only ones. In North Kivu, things are a bit more complicated. Wazalendo fighters can operate asymmetrically in M23 territory, but it's M23 pushing out and taking control of a highway as they allow it to move toward the capital, if only gradually. Right now, South Kivu is far more vulnerable to counter-offensive, whereas operations in the north will probably consist mostly of attempts at containment. At the same time, global conflict observers will be tracking what appears to be a rapidly developing initiative by M23 to transition its future territory into a zone administered by a parallel rebel government. M23 is rapidly working to build up its own state structure, creating a unified government administration alongside its rebel partners in a way that previous rebel-backed insurgencies haven't done. M23 is working to lock down real supply chains, establish firm control of the critical infrastructure required to maintain its smuggling routes, and avenues to facilitate movement of troops and equipment. Simultaneously, M23 is working to step up its forced recruitment efforts in the territory it controls, institutionalizing its attempts to destroy locals and targeting children as a part of that effort. Finally, M23's efforts to fight local militias have become control over chunks of territory, capturing areas with the intent to hold them and prevent any rival armed groups from moving through. And finally, there's one other dimension of the conflict that must be acknowledged: Joseph Kabila. We've spoken about Kabila before on this channel. He's the man who ruled the Congo as a dictator from 2001 to 2019 before handing over control to the current president in a relationship that started off cordial but rapidly deteriorated. After about 2 years of self-imposed exile, Kabila returned to the Congo this past April, touching down in the city of Goma under M23 control. At the time, the Congo's former dictator maintained that he was only there to serve as a mediator, to assist in peace efforts and help to stabilize the country's internal conflict. But from the start, Kabila's true intentions were unclear, and it's become quite obvious that the current government under Felix Tshisekedi has no intention of treating Kabila as a neutral actor. Kabila is under trial for exception in the Congo on charges of treason, and he also stands accused of homicide, torture, and sexual violence through his alleged partnership with M23. In late August, a military prosecutor for the Congo requested the death penalty for Kabila if he's found guilty. According to the Congo, Kabila and M23 have been in league all along, but even if they weren't before, they certainly are now. Kabila and Tshisekedi are bitter rivals with a long-standing military grow. Kabila is perhaps the only person in the Congo with sufficient power to challenge Tshisekedi outright. Now, there's very little chance that Kabila could emerge as a figurehead at the helm of the M23 movement, either as a genuine leader or as a puppet through whom M23 can claim greater legitimacy to govern. Notably, Kabila does support unifying all sorts of opposition to Tshisekedi. At that South African summit that Tshisekedi refused to attend in early September, Kabila met with over 175 leaders from across the broad Congolese political spectrum. Those included civil rights figures, religious leaders, and longtime members of the political opposition, all of whom were in the same place at the same time to hear any pitch for unity Kabila might have decided to offer. Notably, M23 and its allies have been expanding their social media presence in recent weeks, building a justification for the idea that they should be trusted to lead the Congo and framing Congolese soldiers, and especially the Wazalendo, as the true perpetrators of the atrocities that have rocked the nation. During that same time, the Congolese government has denied visas and tried to inhibit travel to the opposition leaders traveling to the Africa summit, possibly playing unintentionally into M23's hands. After all, if those opposition figures fear they can't return home through official channels, they still have a way back in, but they're going to have to go to Goma, firmly under rebel control. We've said it already in today's episode, multiple times over, and we'll say it again. The illusion of peace in the Congo does not match reality, and not even slightly. To the extent that the fighting has slowed down, it's now back underway, with its forces massing for a new series of battles that will continue for months at a minimum. M23's rebel faction is slowly growing into a rival government with the full backing of neighboring Rwanda, while the Tshisekedi government fully intends to bring them down. All the while, Western dollars will pour into the Congo in greater volumes than ever. Peace truly existed. Thank you for watching.
This is the country. 21st century, there is one fundamental rule to warfare that rules them all. There is no power greater than that. It's one of those things that should sound controversial. Sure, the nuclear weapon is the most powerful device on Earth. The drone and the powers of cyberspace are the world's most formidable emerging technologies. And in nearly every global military, only a small portion of troops will get their lives spent to wage war in the skies. Across the nuclear gap, and there's no point having a war anyway. Depends on drones or cyberspace alone, and you'll be woefully out of depth when the major battle arrives. And even across global war zones where a tiny handful of pilots fly above thousands and thousands of soldiers on the ground, it is the pilot who's the war beast they fly that can make an entire battlefield for the target. So today, warfighters, a brief look at the episode. Well, we've got a lot to say. Today we're doing a deep dive into the Air Force's roles to analyse what they fly, how they work, and why they believe the choices we made for the Air Force will enable you to fight and win. So grab yourself a snack, pour yourself a drink, get ready for a long walk or a long drive, home in the traffic if you're me, or if you're in it, fire up your favourite flights and history wins. It's time to talk about air power. Alright, so, as we set our terms of engagement, there are a few spots that we need to focus on. First, our subjects. We're going to start off with the small. The global air force is not too tremendous of an amount of kit, but often with a highly eclectic, fascinating mix of aircraft capabilities, especially adversaries. Then, as we go, powers in the small pond to the regional powers that could have their diplomatic forces nearby to the world-class flying fleets. And finally, to the super air forces that all love, of course, places like Iceland, or Samoa, or Palau. But if you haven't got an air force, then we'll check in with you on some other episode. As we progress through each section, we'll take our own little world tour. First to Central Asia, then the Middle East, then Latin America, then Africa, and finally Europe, before we check in with any place that might not fall into those neat little boxes. We won't be going over every single air force in the world, but the ones we pass over, we'll skip because their air forces resemble other air forces that we have already talked about. In one little bit of housekeeping, we'll be drawing from a wide range of sources, as always, in this episode, but for a point of reference on what each global air force has in its arsenal, we'll be referring to Flight Global's annual World Air Forces Directory for 2024. And in housekeeping point number 2, we'll just clue you in on the existence of many projects. If you know about cool aircraft that you'd like to learn about, we've probably already covered it in length over there. And one final note, once we get to the regional powers on our list, we'll begin accounting for things like army attack helicopters and naval air wings. Okay, housekeeping done. Let's begin with an ode to the little guys, as we begin our tour of the little guys in the box. First, let's hear where the Royal Canadian Air Force's combat fixed-wing aircraft comes in at a grand total of 6. Yes, Cambodia has 6 aeros on a trailer jet, public although Cambodia uses primarily for control and protecting its airspace equipment to good use in combat environments. Although it's not exactly a full market for air forces, is a popular aircraft currently flying with well over 3,000 air forces. You can be sure you'll see them. Alongside its L-39s, Cambodia flies a number of formidable rotorcraft helicopters that are more capable of laying waste ground units and providing close air support during military operations. Like a wide variety of nations around the world, Cambodia prefers to keep a relatively larger number of helicopters rather than splurging on a number of high-powered jets. When not serving a combat role, helicopters like these could be put to work for other utility purposes in a way that a specialised fighter jet just can't. And they're also a lot cheaper, especially when you buy them second-hand. Cambodia flies several copies of each of the Soviet-made MiL Mi-8 and Mi-17, each of which are configured for duties as a gunship, troop transport, a mobile command post, reconnaissance craft, and more. And get used to these 2 helicopters. Taken together, they're the fairest class of military aircraft in the world. Alongside dozen choppers also capable. From Cambodia, let's go over to Bangladesh, still firmly in the category of lesser known air forces, but a bit more familiar with In total, Bangladesh flies well over 40 fighter aircraft, but the ones that really matter are a squadron of 8. These are the 4th generation MiG-29s, Russian multi-role fighters known in NATO nations as the Fulcrum. They're a mainstay of global air forces, and in many of those air wings, they are the centerpiece aircraft. Capable of screaming through the air at Mach 2.3, nearly 2,500 kilometers per hour, or over 1,500 miles per hour, the MiG-29 is highly capable, and it's very hot. Bangladesh has 36 older Chinese versions of MiG-29s, hailing from an era when making fighter jets and strapping missiles into pilots is the closest thing you could build to a missile. The MiG-21 is closer to the MiG-29, although it's a great deal less sophisticated in just about every other way. Bangladesh's version is the Chengdu J-7, a Chinese-built variant that's popular across Asia and Africa. Among Bangladesh's other flying forces, it leverages 3 dozen of the same attack helicopter Cambodia relies on, the MiL Mi-17. Its Soviet-made attack helicopter is joined by Italian choppers. But just as important as combat aircraft for a modern air force is the ability to conduct tactical aircraft, ferry troops, weapons, supplies, and heavy fighting equipment, and more into the places where they might be needed. Unlike Cambodia, which flies fewer transport planes than you could count on one hand, Bangladesh is the proud owner of a total of 8 American-made C-130s, powerful tactical transport aircraft that can carry over 60 airborne troops or 2 armored personnel carriers. In recent years, Bangladesh's Air Force has gotten a workout as part of a variety of ongoing United Nations deployments, where they and their countrymen from the Bangladesh Armed Services have become the largest troop contributor in the world for UN peacekeeping missions. Continuing our march eastward, we're at Afghanistan, where we've got to give our first, as well as our last, hopefully with no surprise to you. Afghanistan was recently involved in this little thing called the War on Terror. In conclusion, terror was taken over by the Taliban. As a result, we'll be talking mostly about Afghanistan before the Taliban takeover, where although nothing in the Taliban arsenal was attached to a jet engine, it had some unique potential nonetheless. Pre-Taliban Afghanistan relied on nearly 20 single-propeller aircraft built in Brazil, known as the A-29. Although they look like something out of World War II, the Super Tucano is a very modern aircraft, with production lines first opening up in 2003, courtesy of the Embraer Corporation. Armed to the teeth and jam-packed with 21st century sensor technology, the Super Tucano is one of the very best close air support aircraft. And for Afghanistan, a place at the heart of the Air Force makes a good deal of sense. After all, these planes were meant to fight the Taliban, a ground insurgency with no air capabilities of its own. Backing up, the Super Tucano was a combat aircraft that arguably looked even more out of place on the global battlefield, the Cessna 208, known in its civilian role as the Grand Caravan. The planes the Afghan Air Force had, however, went by a rather different name, the Combat Caravan. Capable of firing all sorts of nasty US and NATO standard ammunition, including the Hellfire missile, the Combat Caravan cruises through the skies at about 350 kilometers an hour, 250 miles per hour. But much like a Marvel superhero chasing after their incapacitated prey on a Zamboni, the low and slow profile of the Combat Caravan belied the absolute nastiness that was packed on board. In addition to its 15 craft, the combat portion of the Afghan force included nearly 100 Soviet attack choppers we mentioned earlier, plus 8 even more formidable Mi-24s, large gunships and troop transport hybrids that can carry thousands of rounds of ammunition. Afghanistan also flew US helicopters for Hercules transports and a Boeing 727 for VIP transport purposes. When it became clear to the Afghan government and the US back in 2021 that the Taliban's advance couldn't be stopped after US withdrawal, it became of paramount importance to ensure that as few aircraft as possible fell into the Taliban's hands. Some of the aircraft carried their pilots and passengers straight out of Afghanistan, including Super Tucanos, combat caravans, Black Hawks, and more. Ex-Afghan Air Force helicopters would show up in
Welcome back to the Situation Room, the weekly show that dreams of one day opening with me saying, "Good news, everyone, there's nothing to report. Have a lovely week." Until that day comes, I'm your host, Whistler, and this week we're updating you on the apocalypse and delving into the deepening ties between the terror groups, the Houthis and the Taliban, the growing alliance between Israel and the Druze minority in Syria, and the increasing desire in the West to recognize a separate Palestinian state. But first, we are traveling to Europe, where one state is preparing to turn itself into a military colossus, and no, we're not talking about Poland, but rather its guilt-ridden Western neighbor. the Homer Sauerkraut, Das Techno, and soon, perhaps, a world-class army. It is, of course, Germany. After decades of dragging its feet and neglecting the incredible defense potential of an exceptionally potent economy, Germany's leader in Berlin is moving like a man possessed. Just 3-4 months after he assumed the chancellorship, Friedrich Merz has slammed his nation's foot on the defense industrial gas pedal. But over the last 2 weeks, the broad strokes of Germany's push for rearmament have turned to specific, meaningful signs of progress, not just demonstrating that Germany is committed to its new mission, but illustrating just how Berlin plans to get this done. Now, here on this channel, we repeatedly emphasized that for Germany, France, the UK, and the other nations of the NATO alliance, that it is not enough to just make commitments to the idea of defense and set aside some things like that. In order to have any hope of success, a push toward European rearmament will need to overcome 3 massive obstacles all at once. It will need to slice through Europe's new layers of red tape with the efficiency of a Polish-winged hussars infantry that hasn't been issued their polearms. It'll need to focus on not just procuring tanks or aircraft, but procuring the logistical, cyber, space-based, and technologically advanced fighting tools that so many nations have neglected. And it'll need to rebuild and remobilize Europe's atrophied defense industrial base with real contracts, real investment, and massive enough orders that they can keep production going. To that effect, Germany's ruling cabinet approved a new draft law last week, allowing the nation to greatly accelerate its process of arms procurement in what Defense Minister Boris Pistorius describes as a, quote, quantum leap for the nation's competence. Put simply, the law is an attack on red tape, dismantling the complex and overly redundant approval processes that have to be completed for weapons and equipment orders to be placed. It removes many of the complicated financial barriers that typically prevent the German Bundeswehr from rapidly awarding new contracts to people offering to build new or experimental weapons, repair aging military equipment, and refurbish German facilities. It broadens the range of defense equipment that the government can purchase as a military necessity, now allowing for the purchase of medical equipment, construction supplies, and other vital materials that aren't explicitly war-related. It allows Germany to send advance payments to startup companies with good ideas, but a clear need for external funding to get their ideas off the ground, and perhaps most important of all, it allows Germany to take on considerably more debt than its constitution previously allowed. From a strategic perspective, the legislation also codified Germany's perception of Russia as, quote, the most immediate threat to peace and security, formalizing the German government's belief that Russia has no intention of stopping its wars of conquest at Ukraine's western border. Elsewhere in the legislation, some stringent environmental protections are relaxed, military air bases receive new forms of protection, and a loophole that previously allowed unsuccessful bidders for military contracts to drag the government through years of delays has now been closed. All told, the legislation doesn't quite go far enough on its own. Even with it passed, there will be still a lot of outstanding barriers to procurement for Germany to work through. But with such a Herculean task as rebuilding an entire military-industrial complex, it's highly unlikely that this will be the only position that's going to be coming down the line. And as Germany moves to streamline its procurement processes, it's also looking to procure in absolutely massive volumes. According to anonymous German officials speaking to Bloomberg, Germany is in the process of preparing over 60 procurement orders to be approved by or before the end of this year, setting off what should be a whirlwind few months of announcements and new contracts. Among the biggest orders currently on deck are up to 5,000 armored vehicles from the Rheinmetall company, known as the Boxer, as well as 3,500 copies of another line of vehicle. For comparison, the German army today has only about 1,350 proper armored personnel carriers in its arsenal, meaning that Berlin is looking to increase that number 6 times over. The premier vehicle Germany is looking at for that 5,000 copy order is the Boxer, a highly modernized family of armored fighting vehicles that can be reconfigured to suit all sorts of mission objectives, has recently entered service on the front lines of Ukraine. Germany is also looking to pick up at least 20 more Eurofighter Typhoons and may significantly increase its order of Leopard tanks as well. Just a few months ago, at the time that Germany announced an order of 1,000 Boxer armored vehicles, it announced an order for 600 Leopards. And if that number is revised upward to match this new order of Boxers, then that could be 3,000 new tanks coming For comparison, Germany today fields fewer than 300 tanks. And nor are these upcoming 60-plus orders going to be the only new hardware on Germany's market. Just a couple of weeks ago, Berlin purchased an undisclosed number of American-made Typhoon missile systems capable of launching large cruise missiles, but disguised as simple 40-foot shipping containers. That launcher, in particular, has significant value for stealthy deployment, probably explaining why Germany doesn't want to disclose how many it will procure. It's beefing up its logistical capacity with hundreds of new transport trucks and starting work on badly needed renovations of its military bases and barracks. Germany and the UK recently announced plans to build a new deep precision strike weapon with a range of over 2,000 kilometers, and Berlin has started a separate initiative to develop deep strike drones with the help of companies like Airbus, Rheinmetall, Anduril, and Kratos. With an eye to its ongoing collaborative projects, Germany has announced that it will soon, quote, clarify the situation in France over the FCAS, joint sixth-generation fighter jet currently being worked on in three-way collaboration with France. The program has been believed work-sharing disputes between Germany and France, particularly the French aerospace agency Dassault, and while the program isn't doomed yet, it might be called off relatively soon. If that's the case, and recent aerospace history with the Eurofighter program is a predictor of the future, then France may cast out on its own fairly soon, while Germany and its international partners work to develop a final shared product. On the topic of advanced, even futuristic hardware coming out of Germany, the nation is going all in on its support of high-tech defense startups, and the Merz government has made clear that artificial intelligence, drone technology, and battlefield networking systems are of the utmost importance to procure. To hear a chorus of unnamed sources tell it, speaking to Reuters earlier this month, Germany's leaders fully intend to reinvent the nature of warfare itself, while simultaneously setting an example for other European nations to make the same effort. Germany has already started consulting relationships with a range of small startup firms in the same way that they consult with major defense industrial contractors, and as we mentioned earlier, the nation has broken down all sorts of red tape barriers that prevent it from funneling investment into the startup defense industry. In terms of technology, Germany is reportedly open to just about any proposal right now, but the ones that have already caught Berlin's attention, some interesting stuff. Those include AI-powered robot tanks, miniature unmanned submarines that could be used for reconnaissance or attack, and even the technology to equip and manage spy cockroaches. That last initiative, by the way, is from the aptly named company Swarm Biotactics, which works to fit cockroach cyborgs with little backpacks, cameras, and interface package to allow human remote operators to control the bugs from afar, because apparently we live in the future. Even despite its rapid movement on defense, German leaders have still faced enduring critiques from onlookers who insist that the nation's military-industrial complex still isn't ready. From the financial world would suggest that German rearmament has become imminent. The value of Rheinmetall stock has more than doubled in the past 6 months, going from a paltry $160 share at the start of February to over $400 a share at the time of writing. Airbus stock is up more than 20% in the same period, while the defense electronics company Hensoldt has nearly tripled its stock price in that time. Europe's most valuable defense startup, the German company Helsing, just doubled its valuation to over $12 billion, accounting for changes in its value over the last year alone. At the same time, independent defense innovators have real wind in their sails, with the head of Germany's Military Innovation Accelerator reporting that now he's getting 20 to 30 requests a day on LinkedIn from people pitching ideas on new defense technologies to develop, as opposed to maybe 3 such requests a week before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Venture capitalists have flooded over $1 billion into German defense startups in the last couple of years, and more startups are popping up every week, representing a growing willingness to accept risk in order to take advantage of a growing economic boom. As German defense leaders are increasingly trying to make clear, overhauling a system as completely atrophied as Europe's military-industrial complex isn't going to be easy. It's not the sort of problem that a nation could fix with a single comprehensive piece of legislature or a standalone plan to jack up defense budgets. Even moves that feel like really big changes, like Germany's new procurement laws or its decision to nearly triple its defense budget in the coming years, they're still incremental steps. In the world of defense analysis, there is a real and enduring bias towards solutions that seem as if they'd fix all problems at once, a sort of magic pill that would cure the ails of a wounded defense industry, and that if a certain solution doesn't go all the way, then it's doomed to failure. But the problem before Germany now, it's not so simple as giving a specific medicine to cure a specific illness. It's more like akin to untangling a gigantic, practically unsolvable knot where you've got to pull at the edges for a long, long time in all the right places, and where even apparent moments of victory will reveal just more tangled layers underneath. Germany's arms industry isn't just atrophied, it is deeply and profoundly but in order for Germany to this whole thing, it's going to take a multi-stage sequence of seismic shocks to Germany's system in order to get that done. But if the latest revelations from Berlin are any indication, then the Merz government understands the complexity of the task ahead, and the seismic shifts we see today are setting the stage for other seismic shifts tomorrow. Here at Warfronts, we expect a flood of new procurement headlines, an abundance of weird and wonderful design concepts, and a Gatling gun of investment to be coming out of Berlin over the next few months, and probably the next few years. Germany already has the high-tech workforce it needs, plus the civilian innovation, the industrial know-how, and the non-defense manufacturing capacity to yell out the German equivalent of Avengers Assemble and build one of the most advanced and robust military-industrial complexes in the world. Right now, Germany appears to be on the right track, and if the recent announcements by Berlin are any indication, then there will be much more coming soon. Just before we continue, quick plug for our fantastic newsletter. Look, imagine never missing the critical details behind today's global events, those decisive moments and hidden narratives that shape our world. And that's exactly what you'll get with... Now back to it. The situation in Gaza has never been worse. Right now, the internationally recognized death toll in the Gaza Strip has climbed past 60,000. Massacres at aid distribution points for the US-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation take place regularly, and parts of the territory now check 2 of the 3 required boxes to declare an ongoing famine. But although the reality on the ground in Gaza demands urgent attention, and in fact we published an entire episode on the subject a couple of days ago, we're instead going to focus on developments on the international stage. Right now, some of the most powerful nations of Europe and the Arab world are coming together in a coordinated effort to force Israel's hand and bring an end to the fighting. The first shot was Benjamin Netanyahu's courtesy of French President Emmanuel Macron, who declared to the world on Thursday, July the 24th, that his nation would formally recognize a Palestinian state. The recognition was not immediate. Instead, France would General Assembly when it convenes in a month's time, on the 9th of September. At the same time, Macron expressed the need to demilitarize the Hamas terror organization and, quote, secure and rebuild Gaza. As Macron explained to the world in a post on social media, quoted, we must build the state of Palestine, ensure its viability, ensure that by accepting its demilitarization and fully recognizing Israel, it contributes to the security of all of the Middle East. No alternative. Now, with this announcement, France became the first member of the G7 to recognize Palestinian state, as well as the most powerful and influential nation, to join the 147 members of the United Nations that already do so. As for how the nation of Israel reacted, well, we'll give you a guess. Prime Minister Netanyahu laid into France with the decision, offering its harsh condemnation and insisting that the move, quote, rewards terror and risks creating another Iranian proxy, just as Gaza became. And, quoting Netanyahu again, a Palestinian state in these conditions would be a launch pad to annihilate Israel, not to live in peace beside it. The United States, as well as calling the decision, quote, second offense to victims of Palestine. Of course, the harsh reaction of Israel and the United States isn't a surprise to most of us watching, then it certainly wasn't from a clean smart, and in fact, that reaction appeared to be anti-Israel. In his initial announcement, Macron didn't explicitly state France's decision first if Israel were to make certain demands, but it did emphasize that right now, the problem that absolutely must be addressed is the ongoing Gaza war. Quoting again, we need an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and massive humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. And as we go forward, remember that dynamic, that veiled implication that if Israel were to change its conduct, then perhaps recognizing Palestinian statehood wouldn't be such an urgent task. It'll be important. Now, it's important to understand what a recognition of modern Palestinian statehood would actually mean, because it's not quite so simple as just recognizing any other group of people trying to declare independence. Palestine isn't a contiguous territory. It's separated into two parts, Gaza and the West Bank. Each of those two parts controlled by very different organizations. The West Bank is controlled by the Palestinian Authority, which is in turn the political party of Fatah, although in practice both Fatah and the PA exercise control over limited portions of the West Bank territory. Gaza, by contrast, has been ruled by Hamas unilaterally since it violently consolidated control and got rid of Fatah 2 decades ago. Hamas, obviously, is an organization that's done immeasurable harm to the civilian population of Israel and Gaza alike, while Fatah isn't an openly militant organization, it has millions of skeletons in its own closet. These allegations of authoritarianism and corruption working alongside that engaging armed conflict with Israel since the 2000s. It is for this reason that most modern-day calls for Palestinian statehood from the EU aren't simply a call for Palestinian authority, government and let them do whatever they like. Instead, most have a view of the situation that's similar to France. That at the absolute minimum, Hamas absolutely must be denied. Any Palestinian state must recognize and live non-violently in Israel, and most likely, any state will be a carefully managed project. Carefully managed transition, trustworthy Palestinian government is actually feasible. Well, welcome to the debate, you can expect it. Pretty much. But at least in principle, Palestinians in the West Bank are glad to engage with these kinds of Hamas too responded favorably to the idea in a move that served to inflame the backlash from Israel even further. In the days following France's announcement, the big question across the globe was whether it would actually change anything on the ground in Gaza. After all, it's not uncommon for Macron and his government to take maverick positions and try to shift international discourse only to be rebuked or ignored by the rest of the world. This time, however, that didn't happen. Instead, France was joined in its position within just a few days by a major strategic partner and a second member of the G7, the United Kingdom. The British government under Keir Starmer confirmed that it too would recognise Palestinian statehood, also at the upcoming United Nations General Assembly next month. But this time, the conditions placed on Britain's decision were far more explicit. Speaking to reporters at Downing Street, Starmer explained that Israel could prevent Britain from recognizing a sovereign Palestine. But in order to do so, it would have to establish an immediate and lasting ceasefire in Gaza, commit to the stopping of annexation of territory in the West Bank, and pledge to engage in a peace process that would work toward a two-state solution, and thus Palestinian sovereignty pushed off until a later date. Like Macron, Starmer was careful to keep up the pressure on Hamas, quoting here, "Meanwhile, our message to the terrorists of Hamas is unchanged and unequivocal. They must immediately release all of the hostages, sign up to a ceasefire, disarm, and accept that they will play no part in the government of Gaza." The UK's Foreign Minister, David Lammy, had his own harsh words for Israel, quoting again, "Let me be clear, the Netanyahu government's rejection of a two-state solution is wrong. It's wrong morally and it's wrong strategically. It harms the interests of the Israeli people, closing off the only path to a just and lasting peace, and that is why we are determined to protect the viability of a two-state solution." Just as it done with France, Israel's Netanyahu responded to Britain with fire and brimstone. Starmer rewards Hamas's monstrous terrorism and punishes its victims, Netanyahu insisted on X. A jihadist stare on Israel's borders today will threaten Britain tomorrow. Appeasement towards jihadist terrorists always fails. It will fail you too. It will not happen. End quote. But again, harsh condemnations from Israel are to be expected for a nation in Britain's position, and as of now, it appears that Downing Street is undeterred. And with the United Kingdom coming aboard, it appears that other NATO member states may consider following suit. Spain, Poland, and Sweden already recognize Palestinian statehood, as do several other NATO nations in Europe. But now, some of the alliance's wealthiest and most influential members seem as if they might follow suit. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, while declining to formally recognize Palestinian statehood, took an opportunity to declare herself, quote, "very much in favor of the state of Palestine." On July the 30th, the Carney administration in Canada agreed to recognize Palestinian statehood on the same September 9th timeline, and with the added stipulation that Canada would require reform and a new round of elections from the Palestinian Authority. But in all of NATO, it is Germany that could be most influential of all. A German spokesperson initially indicated that the Merz government didn't plan to recognize Palestinian statehood anytime soon, but that statement came when it was only France that had declared its intent. Whether Merz would hold on to that position if Macron, Starmer, and even Mark Carney all decided to recognize a Palestinian state together is an open question. And as the pressure mounted from Europe, several nations of the Arab world came together in an unprecedented step of their own. Over the last couple of weeks, France and Saudi Arabia have been planning for a United Nations conference that kicked off last Tuesday with the goal of working toward a two-state solution. But while the conference generated headline-grabbing proposals like a UN stabilization mission to Palestine in the event that a two-state solution was agreed, the real item of note was a declaration by Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Qatar. Those three highly influential Middle Eastern nations, along with representatives of the Arab League, threw their support behind a declaration that outright condemned the Hamas organization, condemned the terror attack on October the 7th, 2023, called for Hamas to be disarmed and excluded from Palestinian governance in the future, and explicitly laid out their intention to normalize diplomatic relations with Israel. A full condemnation and disavowal of Hamas from nations like Saudi Arabia and Egypt is even more of a seismic geopolitical shift than French or British recognition of Palestinian statehood. That's an unprecedented step in the Arab world, especially for nations that are widely regarded as power players in the region, and it represents a major concession to Israel. Even though many leaders in the Arab world seem to be quite disinterested in supporting Hamas and would like to have normalized relations with Israel a while ago, it's very politically costly at home to side with Israel over Palestinians in any way. And for Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar to all take this step now, especially together, well, they've sent a resounding signal to the rest of the Arab world. Taking a stance against Hamas is worth the political cost and may be the only way to stabilize Gaza. Beyond that, and perhaps most important of all, the decision to rebuke Hamas and commit to normalization with Israel represents a fatal blow to Hamas's long-term ambitions. As we've explained in past episodes on this channel, Hamas's decision to attack Israel on October the 7th did not happen in a vacuum, and its decision to attack before Iran or its other regional proxy forces were ready was not an accident. The Hamas of 2023 was staring at an impending crisis, with Saudi Arabia about to normalize its relations with Israel after having already normalized relations with Iran. For Hamas, that was a mortal threat, since in a Middle East where Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Israel could work together toward common goals and prosperity, even without Israel and Iran needing to work together directly, an anti-Israel terror organization like Hamas would have been an inconvenience. Funding it and supporting it would no longer have been in Iran's interests, and in fact, it could have been in Iran's interests to sell Hamas out directly and allow Israel to dismantle it in the name of future good relations. So, Hamas attacks Israel, knowing that Israel's reprisals will be incredibly destructive, and thus Hamas makes it impossible for nations like Saudi Arabia to ally themselves with Israel, thwarting normalization and buying itself more time in the process. So, if Hamas's intention in launching the October 7th attacks was really to make it impossible for Arab nations to normalize relations with Jerusalem, then last week's announcement is the final nail in Hamas's coffin. For Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, and in principle the entire Arab League to denounce Hamas and sign on to normalization efforts with Israel represents the grand and decisive failure of Hamas's strategy in this war. And if the Arab world is willing to offer Israel the carrot of normalization and assistance in dismantling Hamas, then it becomes far easier to see why France, Britain, Canada, and possibly even Germany and others have decided to show Israel the stick of Palestinian statehood. Take this opportunity, establish a ceasefire, surge humanitarian aid, and the international community will help Israel ensure that Hamas never poses a threat again. The process of establishing a two-state solution will still have to happen, but it'll happen the easy way. But fail to take the opportunity that it's been given by or before the date of the UN General Assembly, and Israel will only see its position get worse. By September 9th, Israel will have chosen its path. By that time, the war in Gaza could be over, but only if Jerusalem can seize this opportunity. So next we turn our attention to the Red Sea, where the growing alliance between Al-Shabaab and the Houthis has regional observers not just ringing alarm bells, but blowing vuvuzelas in a desperate bid to capture the world's attention. Now, regular viewers of the Situation Room will note that this is the second week in a row that we've mentioned Al-Shabaab. In a world where conflicts emerge faster than Nick Cannon's babies, looking at you, Thailand and Cambodia, I should tell you something. Al-Shabaab has been going from strength to strength in Somalia, most recently capturing the strategic central Somali town of Mahas. Mahas is a key transit hub connecting to several important towns, including Baladweyne and Bulaberte, so its fall is already detrimental to Somalia's government. However, what makes it a death knell to some observers is the fact that since 2022 it has served as the beating heart of a joint offensive by the Somali army and allied clan militias aimed at dislodging Al-Shabaab from central Somalia. Its fall sets the stage for Al-Shabaab to escalate attacks on major towns across central Somalia, including along the Ethiopian border. The Houthis, on the other hand, while still a significant asymmetric force, are far from their peak. First, the systematic dismantling of Iran's regional network by Israel and the US has blunted the entire axis of resistance. Second, Israel's attacks, such as a recent air raid on Yemen's Hodeida port, targeting Houthi-linked sites used to stage drone and missile strikes, have destroyed a lot of their infrastructure. And finally, according to analyst Adam Russell, writing in Between the Lines, Trump's decision to let China buy Iranian oil has effectively cut the Houthis out of their existing lucrative role smuggling Iranian oil to China, forcing them to find new ways to maintain influence and generate revenue. So, what are the two groups to do when one is on the up and up and trying to solidify its position, while the other is on a downward trend and desperate not to fall any further? Well, they partner up. The alliance between Al-Shabaab and the Houthis isn't wholly new. In 2024, Michael Horton, director of Red Sea Analytics International, wrote a report for West Point's Combating Terrorism Center, highlighting that the relationship was primarily based on the Houthis' need to secure funding and supply chains independent of Iran, a need that has grown in the year since the report was published. The UN corroborated Michael's findings with a 2024 report that described the relationship as transactional or opportunistic and not ideological. The UN experts aren't the only ones who describe the relationship in these terms. Speaking to New Lines magazine, Amar Hashi, Somalia's special presidential envoy for stabilization and civilian protection, also described it as a purely commercial and not ideological agreement. This is an important distinction to make because the ideological gulf between Al-Shabaab, a Sunni group, and the Houthis, a Shia group, is vast. And while we won't go into the differences between these two interpretations of Islam right now, since it would probably involve having to spin off a whole new channel called Comparative Religion Fronts, suffice it to say that it's vast enough that if things were different, the two groups might be at each other's throats. The fact that they have an alliance is already surprising enough, but to see it deepen paints a worrying picture for the region's security. So what does a partnership between two of the world's most formidable terror organizations look like? Arms smuggling, weapons purchases, training, and joint attacks. The UN uncovered evidence of at least two in-person meetings held in July and September 2024 between high-ranking officials of the groups. During these meetings, they discussed the transfer of material and training from the Houthis to Al-Shabaab in exchange for money, increased piracy, and arms smuggling. A key item on the negotiating table: light weapons. Although Somalia is a hotspot for arms smuggling, most of the weapons flow out to other countries in Africa. Consequently, the prices for small and medium arms in Somalia are higher, sometimes up to 5 times higher than in Yemen, which was awash in weapons even before the start of the civil war. According to the African Union Transition Mission in Somalia, or ATMIS, Al-Shabaab received light weapons that it used in attacks against African Union forces in September and November. Nor is it just light weapons. The partnership gives Al-Shabaab access to more advanced weapons, including surface-to-air missiles. The UN further discovered that Al-Shabaab had sent over a dozen operatives to Yemen for training, including in the use of weaponized drones. The training is already paying dividends. The African Center for Strategic Studies notes that Al-Shabaab